a lot of times, when you come out of school, you maybe roll 2 pies.
Not a lot of
roll
repetition.
100 pies before you get to speed. But I always challenged myself, like we would have to make 1,200 rolls for wedding, because we did catering, and we had to make rolls. So we'd have like 20 press of dough. A press is a 3-pound unit of dough. Makes 36 rolls. And then we would challenge ourselves to see how fast you could do a press. In the beginning, you were doing it in 5 minutes. By the time you really got good, you did it in a minute and a half.
Wow.
So,
Lightning speed.
yeah, I think
Practice.
Ambidextrous.
Practice is all it is.
your salary is kind of determined by how well you can produce and at what quality you're producing. When I went down to Florida originally, I mentioned to you, the salaries in Florida were very, very low. So I said I went by a bakery that had a sign, and I said, I'd like to work, but I want 20% of what I could produce. He says, that sounds reasonable. He said, we have a wedding cake to do on Saturday, so come in on Thursday. I says, what am I going to do Thursday and Friday? He said, well, you got to do this wedding cake. I says, you know, I came from a place where we did 12 to 20 wedding cakes on a weekend, and you're telling me you want 3 days to do one wedding cake? I says, how am I ever going to make any money? How much time do you need? I says, one wedding cake. He said, we'll have all the cake layers baked. I says, well, got the cake layers baked, I just have to fill it and decorate it. If it takes me more than 2 hours, then you don't want me here. And so I convinced them, and then they put me out in the window to decorate, and we start picking up more wedding cakes and more business. And
The marketing angle.
yeah, I was able to make a really good salary out of it.
And raise the bar for the business, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that if you have any intentions of working in this trade, whether it be on the savory side or whether it be on the pastry side, the first thing you should do is get to know your ingredients. Just like a carpenter has to know about the lumber that they're using, a culinarian has to know about his market or her market basket. So I tell the people, you go to the store and you buy 2 varieties of apples, and you eat one cold and one with the application of heat. And then you, next week, get 2 other varieties. Each supermarket has 20 varieties of apples. So you begin to develop a sense of flavor, then you start to combine tartness with sweetness, the moisture content, how you can bake it. And then it brings you closer to your food. The closer you get to the food, and we see that now with this farm-to-table movement, the more you'll enjoy doing your work. And I think that a lot of times we don't explore enough the market basket that we have available. When Grandma made an apple pie, she only had 1 or 2 varieties of apples. And now we got apples from the West Coast, East Coast, and all over. I think, trying to think of some of the highlights of the career.
So you,
At Food Trades High School, I was on a demonstration team. We would go to different high schools, and we would do a demonstration, had to decorate a cake in 10 minutes to the class that had the best attendance. The butcher had to bone out a leg of lamb in 10 minutes.
ooh,
And the catering student made a potato salad fish with carrots for the
Scales?
scales, and then we would try to get students to go to Food Trades High School. During my tenure at Food Trades High School, we were allowed to go to the ACF meetings on 23rd Street at the Steuben House. And that gave me an introduction to the ACF, and then later on, in the 60s, they had two chefs organizations, ACF and American Institute of Chefs. I got opportunity to meet my good friend and colleague from that time on, Fritz Sonnenschmidt, at the Long Island Culinary Association meetings that were held in Floral Park, I believe.
Long time ago.
Oh, right. And,
How old were you then?
well then, that was 62 I think it was. 62, so 38, 50, 24,
Young man.
22, 24. And Fritz had a hat, and at the end of the night, it was his hat that we used to put money in to pay for the beer and to give the girl a...
That's why I got rich.
Yeah. Secret pocket in the hat.
I met a lot of my colleagues through the ACF, and
It's a great organization for that, really good networking organization.
networking organization, and even later on, I found out that when I went to Food Maritime to teach, they asked me to serve as the liaison between the ACF and the Council Hotel and Restaurant Training Institute. So in a sense, I was the first ACF educational director.
Wow.
And then, you know, in my experience in the difficulties that it was for me to learn the trade, I told you the baker wouldn't share his recipes, and the only way you could learn the trade, then they say, well, the chefs change a lot of jobs. Well, the reason why we changed a lot of jobs is to gain a lot of experience. So it took you 10, 12 years to master a whole bunch of things, because you weren't...
How long did you recommend holding each job? I mean, if you left too soon, it would look like you couldn't hold a job. So if you have to have a lot.
No, the network,
A year?
Yeah, 6 months to a year.
And then always get a good recommendation, right?
You
From
needed a recommendation,
your employer?
and it wasn't like you went on the internet or you had a resume. They called up the previous guy.
they
that
made
you were-
sure.
And they said, okay, yes, send them there. I've had the opportunity to teach in all 50 states and 32 countries. So it's been a good ride.
I guess that's an advantage to the culinary trade in general, is that it's universal.
There's a lot of
It's really a language
camaraderie.
of all nations.
Everybody has to eat.
Everybody does, and there's only 3 foods: protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and only half a dozen ways to cook them. So
That's it.
The,
That's the base.
you know, the camaraderie in the industry is something that is very, very important to recognize. My wife is a cosmetologist, and we opened up a bakery in Pleasant Valley. And when we had the bakery in New York, if we ran out of a bag of flour, I could go across the street to the next bakery and get a bag of flour. She said, in cosmetology, if you ran out of something, you can't go across the street, they wouldn't give it to you.
it's
And-
highly competitive versus
Highly competitive.
cooperative, right?
If, at the time when my brother was in Korea, and we still had the 2 bakeries, and my other brother was hospitalized, he had a kidney replacement, other bakeries, our competitors, helped me out with stuff that I was only about 15 at the time. I didn't have a full repertoire of the stuff. So the Cody Bake Shop would make my rye bread for me because I hadn't reached that stage of making rye breads. He was a German guy and he worked with the rye flours and pumpernickel flours. So he would make the bread for me to sell in the store so that we had maintained our product. I think the long hours that you work are compensated by the joy of the work. I mean, it's always challenging.
You know, speaking about the flours, you have a variety of flours in a bake shop today. If you walk in, you see 30 bins, all different varieties of flours, many varieties of wheat flour, generally, and none of them are all-purpose flour. Back when you were a young man, was there still that same kind of availability of flours, all these diverse kinds?
Yeah, the supply chain was different. In the current supply chain, we use broadline distributors, and they're limited in the amount of flours that they could handle. And that's where all-purpose flour came along. And now they call it hotel and restaurant flour. But in those days, we had a guy that only delivered flour. A baker uses, an average baker uses 10 bags of flour a week. So if
How
you
much?
had
100-pound bags.
100-pound bags
1,000 pounds of flour.
a week. That's what it takes to meet your production. The salary is determined by your production. What your daily salary is, what you can produce in one day. Let me get this formula right now. Your daily production, right, is equal to your salary. That gives you 20% on a 5-day week. Although bakers usually work a 6-day week. But now there's unions involved, so they're going back to a 5-day week.
Mm-hmm. How many hours a day would you work?
Probably 10 would be the average.
What time would you start?
Well, it depends if you were a bench hand or you were a decorator. The bench hands, that's the people that work on the bench. The night baker would start at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the next shift comes in at 8 o'clock on the bench. The bench being where all the dough makeup takes place.
Mm-hmm.
And then 10 o'clock you would get your cake bakers, and then the last people that come in would be the finishers, the cake decorators, conditor.
Who cleaned up?
You maintained your own workbench, and there was usually a person that cleaned the sheet pans and peeled vegetables, fruits mostly.
So you had like prep and pot washer positions?
Yeah, usually it went to a young person that was trying to learn the trade.
Mm-hmm. So that was their way in. They
As
would
they
kind of
went
be
in.
working their way up from the bottom.
When we started out, we had these Russian black iron pans that were scraped, and then you put a coating of grease just before parchment paper.
Mm-hmm.
When they came out with the aluminum pans, because the aluminum pans, the black pans are like a cast iron pot is to a chef.
Mm-hmm.
The black pan was to the baker.
Mm.
You could bake on a seasoned black pan
Wouldn't stick.
without greasing it. But you had to season it like you do a cast iron pot.
Mm-hmm.
Got the pans, you put it in the oven, 450 degrees, 10-15 minutes, came out, put a coating on it, and then that was,
Of oil.
and then you never washed it. I mean,
Sure.
you scraped it, and we used to use burlap bags to wipe them. When the night baker came in, he put his hand across the pan like that, and if it got soiled, he put it on the side. You had to do that one over again.
Mm.
I think that the aluminum pans didn't work that way. You couldn't seal the aluminum pans like you could the iron pans. So then they came out with parchment paper.
You need a liner.
Right. And now with parchment paper, I always tell people that are going into the industry, you get evaluated by how you use the parchment paper. You could tell who is the owner of the shop because they use the parchment paper 2 times, 3 times. They
It's
turn
2
it over
sides.
to use it again. And sometimes you see a young person come in and they're ripping parchment paper.
Sure.
Parchment paper now costs almost 6 cents a sheet. So if you lose 10, that's 60 cents a day. That's $3.60 a week, or $3 a week. And 3 times 50 is $150 a year.
I remember getting hollered when I
4
was.
bakers.
I got hollered at when I was a young cook for throwing away the butter wrappers because we used to have to save them to put on the sauces so they didn't form a skin. Nothing was wasted.
Nothing was wasted.
That was great. Yeah, that's really a smart,
But we're in a
green way to go,
Yeah.
and it's also a more profitable way.
disposable society now.
Yeah, that's what's happened.
I think today is we are too infused with sanitation. Over enthused to see, and so very often because of that we do more mistakes when it comes to that. There was nothing wrong with the butter, what's it called, paper.
Mm-hmm.
It was more actually more sanitized than some of the papers we use these days.
Yeah, it made perfect sense.
So
Plus now we throw it away and use something else.
yeah, and it costs money, and at the same time, it's even really have, in my opinion, less sanitation in most of the kitchens as well as bake shops than they had, 50 or 60 years ago.
And speaking about butter, how did you get your dairy, like milk and how did that come butter and all those things?
That came in from there was a dairy supplier that just sold eggs and butter. And then during World War II, right after World War II, because things were, butter was rationed and cream, dairy products, everybody stopped making their own topping. And we had a homogenizer, and we made what we call whipping cream.
Hmm.
And the whipping cream is not heavy cream. You people are familiar with it as richest topping.
Mm-hmm.
The butter fat is replaced with hydrogenated fats.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes through a homogenizer. Now,
So there's
we
quite a bit
got
of
a
processing
call
involved.
at the bakery for a whipped cream wedding cake. That was, at that time, air conditioning was just starting to come around. We're talking about 1952, and the lady wanted a whipped cream wedding cake. So we built a plexiglass case. And on top, we had a shelf with holes, 10 pounds of dry ice, held at 50 degrees for 6 hours.
Hmm.
Tested it out. Put a wedding cake in it, delivered it to the Chateau Gardens. 1 hour later, the bride's mother calls up. The cream is falling off the cake. You ruined my daughter's wedding. Gotta get that, or bring another wedding cake down. We brought another wedding cake down, and we took that one and we sent it to a lab to test. We thought there was something wrong with the cream. The result was, when the dry ice evaporated, the air became heavier and it pushed the cream off the cake.
Hmm.
So we turned it around and made a planter out of it.
Before the 1950s, how did you keep a kitchen cold enough to work with butter creams and puff pastry and stuff?
It always had one room. That was the finishing room. That was the only part that would be air conditioned.
So you actually had air conditioning.
Yeah, in the finishing room.
Hmm.
You didn't want air conditioning in
Just it was
the
unhealthy.
dough shop.
Yeah, you catch a cold.
Yeah, well, the doughs worked better.
And the yeast
If the
wouldn't
shop
mess the
was
same
warm.
way, probably. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, it's a different kind of heat. I could take the heat of a kitchen, but I can't take the heat of the sun beating on my head.
Yeah, right, it is.